Hello, greetings. My name is Ephraim Lansky. I'm a medical doctor and a pharmacognosist who works with medicinal plants. I'm going to be talking today about inflammation and ketamine. Ketamine at low doses is a kind of anti-inflammatory, along with the idea that depression is a form or a manifestation of inflammation, so that at sub-anesthetic doses, ketamine can work to mitigate inflammation and also to mitigate depression. Okay, so I've prepared a short presentation regarding my experience with Pomegranate product and also with its possible effect on ketamine. So I'm going to try sharing the screen now, and we'll switch to the presentation, and then we'll come back and say a few words before saying goodbye. Okay. So I'm going to try to share the screen, and here we go. Okay, so this is the first slide, and it says pomegranate emulsion as a potential adjuvant to ketamine antidepressant therapy, a solution for ketamine-related inflammation. Now, here in the right side, right lower corner, you see a kind of stylized area of where the hippocampus sits in the limbic system of the brain. And next to that is a seahorse, which is also called hippocampus in Latin. And what we found was that, what many people have found, is that inflammation brought on by ketamine in a strong form of a strong dose or high dose of ketamine can cause what's called in the literature a model schizophrenia. And this has certain behavioral manifestations where the animal engages in stereotyped movements, running around, biting his tail, things of that nature. And also, it causes damage to the brain, particularly to the citric acid cycle in the mitochondria of the hippocampus. Let's see if we can go to the next slide. Okay, so as I said here is that ketamine is like an anti-inflammatory drug at low doses. And as the dose increases, so also is the likelihood of unwanted pro-inflammatory compromise, especially of the mitochondrial function in the hippocampus, the model schizophrenia. And here you can see that the sword indicates a double-edged sword, like all drugs actually are double-edged swords. But in this case, at relatively low doses, you see the stimulation effect. In this case, it's actually a kind of inhibition effect or protection against inflammation. But as the dose increases, in other words, as you move along the abscissa to the right, along the x-axis to the right, and the dose becomes greater, you see that the curve drops below the line, and then adverse effects, in this case, pro-inflammatory effects, follow. Now here I've just arranged a few articles, recent articles mainly. On the left, you see pro-inflammatory effects of ketamine, and on the right, anti-inflammatory effects of ketamine. So the first paper is from 2022, and it emphasizes how ketamine enhances dopamine receptor expression. And in the mouse model of schizophrenia induced by ketamine. And the third article asks if ketamine is neuroprotective or neurotoxic, and the answer is it can be either. The second article talks about ketamine cystitis, which we'll talk about a little more. This is a kind of very common and unpleasant side effect that ketamine can induce, and it's also kind of inflammation. Okay, and then the anti-inflammatory side, you see that ketamine can protect against inflammatory stresses. It can act as an anti-inflammatory, antidepressant in psychiatric emergency, and it can also mitigate inflammation, which results in colitis. Now we'll talk about pomegranate. The pomegranate to the rescue. The pomegranate contains both a aqueous phase, which is rich in flavonoids, phenolic acids, and tannins in pomegranate juice and also in the peels, and a non-polar lipid phase found in the seeds, which consists of treanoic acids, especially punicic acids, sterols, and tocopherols. Pomegranate, you know, is an ancient symbol for medicine itself. And this was very nicely explained in an article in the British Medical Journal in 2000. And in this current year already, there are two articles here I just cited, punicic acid and its role in the prevention of neurological disorders. That is the lipid phase of the pomegranate. And the second article is punicalagin alleviates renal injury. And this punicalagin is a tannin found in the aqueous phase. So you can see that there are protective anti-inflammatory effects in both phases. Now, in our own work, we put these together in different combinations, a fraction from the peel, a fraction from the fermented juice or wine, and a fraction from the seed oil. The first two, the peel and the wine, are aqueous phase fractions, whereas the oil obviously is a lipid phase fraction. We kept the total dose of this intervention the same in all cases of 3 milligrams per milliliter, regardless whether only one fraction or two fractions or all three fractions were used. If all three fractions were used, then the dose of each fraction has to obviously be less in order for the total to be 3 milligrams. Yet, in spite of the lower dose of any one fraction, in this graph, you can see that the combination of all three fractions had the greatest effect at reducing activity and expression of serum phospholipase A2, or SPLA2. This enzyme is responsible for breaking arachidonic out of the cell membrane and having it available to go into inflammatory cascades. It breaks down into pro-inflammatory factors such as prostaglandins or leukotrienes. And so as you can see that to obtain the maximum anti-inflammatory effect, in this case, we need to combine the different fractions, not just using the peel or not just using the oil or a single component, but actually combining them. And this is what we call intracrine, from the word like endocrinology, synergy. It's the interaction between the different parts to produce a greater effect. Now, as I mentioned before, ketamine can cause a specific cystitis called ketamine cystitis. It's an unrecognized form of dysuria, which is painful urination. And there are specific impacts of the ketamine on bladder dysfunction that have been elaborated with electron microscopy. Curiously, pomegranate also has beneficial effects in cystitis. The top paper is for cystitis induced by cyclophosphamide, a drug. And the second case, the pomegranate extract has a beneficial effect in the common cystidities in women. And pomegranate is also an antidepressive agent in its own right. And these three papers are all dealing with the aqueous extract of aqueous extracts of pomegranate. Now, we did try to use our pomegranate emulsion, which is a combination of the aqueous and lipid fractions, in a ketamine-induced model of schizophrenia in rat. And we found that the ketamine, where we're looking here now, we also looked at behavior and also at the neurochemistry after the animals were sacrificed. And we did show trends in dampening the schizophrenic-like behaviors, the stereotypy, and the increased overall activity. And by itself, the pomegranate emulsion what actually increased the activity of complex 1 in the citric acid cycle. It's the first step in the electron transfer process in the citric acid cycle. And then we also studied the effect of this pomegranate emulsion administered to rats by gastric gavage. And we showed first of all that the product was very well tolerated, and that when the animal had been exposed to ketamine and had a depression in the complex 1 activity in the mitochondria of the hippocampus of the animal, that the pomegranate product had a mitigating effect on that depression. In other words, there was less depression of that citric acid cycle in the mitochondria, and it was dose dependent to a degree. And those you can see in the two last little groupings there. The middle column represents the hippocampus. The one on the left is at 1 milligram dose, and at the right is a 10 milligram dose. So it's a very preliminary work, but it gives you some idea. Now, since that work was done over 10 years ago, we've improved the product. We've learned how to make it more concentrated and more amenable to encapsulation in an oral dose. So that's it. I'm going to stop this share now and see if we can see each other again. So here I am again. And as we mentioned in the last slide, where we have written a patent, a provisional patent, almost a year ago, and that will need to be completed by the end of June. And if there is someone interested in this project, I'm willing to, share the project in a kind of equal way with a potential investor who would be willing to absorb relatively modest cost of completing the patent, of completing the legal fees associated with that for the legal writing, and also helping to maintain it going forward. So we think it has a great potential. We know that there are, as I said, there are negative aspects or two-edged sword to all medications, and ketamine is certainly not excluded from that limitation. However, in spite of its excellent and very promising long-term effects against depression, it may also cause some untoward side effects. And we feel that the pomegranate emulsion, which incorporates both the aqueous and lipid aspects of the pomegranate, can help to mitigate the untoward effects, reduce the chances of inflammation, and work with the ketamine to actually enhance the antidepressant effect. So that is what I have to say for now. And thank you very much for listening to me. And if you're interested, you can contact me during the times on Zoom, where I'll be available to answer questions, or you can also write to me by email. Thank you very much.